Welcome to the Regina Leader Post Rider Rumblings podcast. I am Taylor Shire, and alongside me is Darrell Davis. This is officially episode 135 of the Rider Rumblings. Of course, we have to give a shout out to Rob Vanstone and Murray McCormick, who trudged through 134 of these episodes and certainly brought some good insight to the Saskatchewan Roughriders over the years. Just first of all, Darrell, I do want to give a shout out to Rob and Murray for all their tireless work over the years putting this together.
Absolutely. I don't think I saw all 134 episodes, but I did watch a few of them, and they had a good time and they were informative. They've both gone on to greener pastures. We see Rob quite a bit working for the Roughriders, and I've seen Murray McCormick a few times. So they've set a pretty good path for us on this one, and hopefully there's a lot of people carrying over and still enjoying finding out something about the Roughriders.
Yeah, Rob, of course, is now wearing green with the club, and Murray, of course, in retirement. I assume he's on the green more often than he's in the sand and in the rough. I'm sure he's getting his rounds in quite a lot.
Hit a wedge. I haven't seen him hit a wedge, right?
No doubt. I guess we'll start our episode 1, but this episode 135, we're heading into a new season. 2024 CFL season's right around the corner. On the weekend, the Riders made all of their cuts. I guess I'll just start with your thoughts on maybe the biggest surprise or the most notable cut. I think Mason Fine would be at the top of that, right?
Yeah, I think so, right? And Antonio Pipkin, too. The two quarterbacks, veteran quarterbacks, Taylor, who we thought had a chance. It just didn't seem practical to keep all of them. I know they had a bunch of quarterbacks around here last year. Obviously, Trevor Harris, coming back from knee surgery at the age of 38, is still the main guy, and he's going to be the starter. But we're always wondering, especially after watching the backup struggle last year, who's going to take his place if he gets hurt. Hopefully he doesn't. We're not wishing that on anybody, of course. And when they brought Mason Fine back on a 2-year deal, I just couldn't figure out why, because he had never really shown that he was capable of leading an offense. And during the preseason, he did the same thing. It was that short yardage game that just never really made anybody feel inspired. So he didn't make the football team. Antonio Pipkin, I don't think they gave him a chance to do anything, and they had already probably predetermined that he wasn't going to be their short yardage quarterback. So cutting those two players really clarified their quarterback situation with Trevor Harris on the top. Shea Patterson, a veteran, had a great preseason, was on target and ran the ball, and I really liked his attitude. So he's the number 2 guy, and Jack Cohn, the Notre Dame product, obviously picked up the offense very well, very quickly, throws the football, and he's stepped into number 3. And I heard you ask head coach Corey Mace today. It was a good question. Is that the way you would like to set up a quarterback room? And his response was kind of what you figured, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you never want to get to number 2 and number 3 in your quarterbacking depth chart in a year, but it does happen regularly, and it obviously happened for the Riders last year. So, yeah, I kind of phrased it as, you have your veteran at the top. Of course, Trevor Harris. You have your kind of middle guy. He's been around a little bit. He's maybe the next one in Shea Patterson, and then the raw rookie in Jack Cohn. And, I think both of those number 2 and 3 guys have upside, and that's what you want versus, what you've seen from Mason Fine over the years. He hasn't really progressed. He's just kind of very the same, right? He hasn't gone up. He hasn't really gone down. He just kind of is the same. And Patterson, him able to handle short yardage, basically meant goodbye to Antonio Pipkin, because Patterson essentially replaces 2 quarterbacks now. He's the short yardage guy and the backup, allowing for a rookie to come in with maybe some upside, right?
Yeah, I think when we were watching the preseason, especially that first game, and they put Shea Patterson in for that short yardage situation, and he did pretty well. He had done that before they decided that they would go with Pipkin last year. So Patterson has that experience. He told us in the preseason he doesn't want to just do that. And I saw a real change in him from last year, Taylor. When we were watching him at the end of last season, he just kind of seemed to be meandering about and not really any confidence. I said he lacked confidence on a team that had no confidence. He was just kind of languishing, waiting his chance and they didn't seem to have much of a plan for him. But he went away in the offseason and obviously worked on a lot of things, including his attitude. He's come back with the right type of attitude. And I think they should be comfortable with him as their number 2 quarterback, because the number 2 quarterback is always an important guy around the CFL. Very few starting quarterbacks play all 18 games. So Shea Patterson might get some action. Hopefully it's just a little bit of action that Trevor Harris is healthy, because that's the only way they're going to have a chance to do anything, I think, if Trevor Harris is healthy at least most of the year.
And I think Shea came in, like you said, with that different attitude. I feel like he was a guy who really came in with something to prove. There was just something about him and speaking with him and kind of just, his mannerisms. I feel like he just, not quite a chip on his shoulder, but he really wanted to prove that he can take that next step in his career. And he talked about that after the preseason, that he's ready. He's been a backup before. He was in the CFL in 21, as a backup to Harris in Montreal. Spent some time in BC, then came to Saskatchewan.
And the difference, you told me quite a bit about the difference between interviewing Mason Fine and interviewing Shea Patterson, and that was quite noteworthy too, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Mason, I've never had a bad interview with Mason, even though a guy who, his job was on the line. He was upbeat and positive. So, yeah, Mason Fine, both those guys, I mean, great guys off the field, good players on the field as well. And I don't know, Mason Fine, maybe he ends up somewhere else, maybe not. I feel like teams have enough film on him and they have enough of their quarterback depth charts where they're not going to bring in a guy who's been around 4 or 5 years, but you never know, where he could land, if there's an injury somewhere, right?
Your point was really valid too, Taylor, that you said he didn't improve, and I didn't see a whole lot of improvement in Mason Fine. The guy we saw in the preseason this year was basically the same guy they had last year and the year before, that he can run things but doesn't inspire anybody. And I think you have to see improvement in somebody, and that's why they kept Shea Patterson. It's going to be interesting. I've had a lot of fans asking me, so they decided on Mason Fine, let Jake Delagala go away. And Delagala had went to the BC Lions as a free agent, had a bad preseason game the first time, but the second game played pretty well. So I'm imagining that there's going to be a lot of Rough Rider fans, and us too, obviously, paying attention to Jake Delagala's statistics and see how well he performs. And then, he could say, oh, boy, you guys made a mistake. Jake Ward, we might say, you made the right move. We'll see how Jake Delagala goes along this year with BC.
Yeah, they didn't keep either. So, if Jake was in Mason's shoes right now, would they have selected Patterson over Delagala based on what we saw last year? I don't know. I feel like Delagala came in with some upside. I think we were all surprised when the Riders either moved on from him or Delagala moved on from Saskatchewan. I don't really know the story, behind free agency. And, the Riders are obviously going to say that they elected to keep Mason and sign Mason, but you never know Jake's story. At least I haven't heard Jake's story if he was wanting to move on from this team as well. I know that's the other side of it, right?
Yeah, true enough. So it's going to be different this year with these guys. So the quarterbacks, the big thing that we've been worried about here with the Rough Riders for the last 3 or 4 years is offensive line. Bringing in Jamarcus Hardrick, a huge addition, a veteran leader and a strong side or a right tackle who obviously gives them a stable spot over there. They've played 3 Canadians in the middle who seem to be okay. That's not a bad Blake, Godber, and Furlan. And then left tackle, the blind side. That's the one that we've been paying attention to. If they can keep Trevor Harris upright, this team's got a chance. But over the past few years, the Rough Riders just seem to have bad luck with either finding guys who could play and then getting hurt, or not being able to find guys who can play. But it looks a little bit more solid this year, doesn't it?
Yeah, Trevor Reed is that guy left tackle, and day one of camp, he was the guy they put out there at left tackle, and now day one of the season, he's gonna continue to be that left tackle spot. So I feel like they have their number one choice at left tackle versus last year when they had Gerald Hawkins and then Eric Lofton and Colin Kelly played right side, and then they Brandon Council was in there as well. It was just a kind of a revolving door. They didn't really have an answer. They weren't really comfortable. Lofton and Council even switched tackle sides, a couple games in. So for Harris, certainly, he needs that protection. I think, that's going to have a big year if that offensive line can produce and get holes for him. So it all starts up front. Most football fans know that, and I think that's certainly the case for the Riders this year. One other, I guess, noteworthy cut, Braden Lennius, Canadian receiver, 2019 draft pick. He's been with the club for a while and obviously has some local connections, but just couldn't stay healthy. And not that, I don't know if injury prone is the right word, but because he had a lacerated kidney and then a foot injury last year against Toronto. And I think those are just 2 unfortunate injuries for a guy who I believe was highly touted, prior, even at a stint in the NFL too.
Yeah, he looked like he was going to be quite a player when they first obtained him, and we were thinking the same thing. But the old saying, Taylor, you can't make the club in the tub, right? And he's never you might not call them injury prone because they are weird ones, and the lacerated kidney is horrible, is very scary, and we're glad he's okay. But you can't, if you're not going out and proving yourself over and over again, somebody's going to pass you, and he wasn't able to do that because, as Corey Mace told us in one of our scrums the other day, that he just hasn't been able to rehabilitate himself physically and get ready to play. So maybe they'll take a look at him down the line. I can't imagine. Well, maybe another team will take a chance because there is some raw talent there. But if you're not playing and putting up the numbers, they've drafted a lot of receivers, and this team, for some of its foibles and maybe some weak areas in a few places, has a pretty good crop of Canadian receivers, and they obviously felt that they could make a move like that.
Yeah, I was surprised that Lennius didn't land on the 6-game injured list to start the year. I don't know if there's something that goes into a player not going on the 6-game. They put 3 other guys on the 6-game injured list to start the year, so I don't know what the decision is. Mace said they're going to keep track of Lennius's progression and maybe take a peek at bringing him back if he does get healthy. So you never know. It's his time isn't necessarily over, but it doesn't bode well for him to be not placed on this 6-game injury list to start the year and use the facilities. I don't really know what goes into that.
Yeah, true. But then they're committed to him for 6 games too, right? If they could pass,
right? Yeah, I guess he has a higher salary, right? Too.
Yes, exactly. And even committing to him, they're going to have to pay for him. What you want to do, and teams do this all the time, they'll put a player on. They did it with Darrell Walker last year. Remember, they brought him back, proved he was healthy, and then cut him because you can't cut a player when he's hurt. This way, they've severed that connection with him. And if they want to bring him back, it's not going to cost them any money. So the players who are on there, Jackson Ford, the draft pick, Darrell Riley, I can't even remember his name at the moment because we hardly saw him. Yeah, Busby. Yeah, he's on the 6th game as well. These guys are hurt, right? And Jack and Weed, the linebacker who they drafted, so they're already committed to a bunch of younger players on there, and you may as well move on from Lennius. It hurts to do it, and you could tell Corey Mace didn't want to do it, but that's the way it goes. Some guys play their way onto the team, some guys play their way off of the team, and he wasn't able to play his way onto the team.
I guess similar to what they did with Jalen Edwards-Cooper, as opposed to 6-gaming him and keeping his rights. He probably carried a bit of a salary too, and cut ties with that. It makes space for everybody else, and you let the player get healthy on their own, and maybe bring them in for a prorated salary if he comes back midway through the season, as opposed to having 2 or 3 or 4 months of contract eaten up on the injured list. So I think I guess I just answered my own question there.
Good point. Yeah, in terms of they need to be efficient with money. Some teams too, right? I know the Roughriders and most of the teams will have 12 players on the practice roster, but you look at other teams around the league, the Edmonton Elks are only carrying 6, right? They're in a bit of a financial bind, so maybe they're going to cut back a little bit on players, although with Chris Jones being in charge there, they might be able to expand that one way or the other. So we've seen him do that when he was in Saskatchewan. So, but you're supposed to do things above board, and most teams do, so we'll see how they do it. And the Roughriders, they made practical decisions, and you have to sometimes make those tough but fair decisions, and for the betterment of the team first and foremost, and then also be fair to the players. And if Lennius was healthy, then there's no reason to keep him around, and maybe, as you said, he might be able to look somewhere else to find a job too.
All right, so the Riders, of course, start on Saturday in Edmonton against the Elks, and it's going to be a little bit earlier than originally planned because the Edmonton Oilers, of course, play game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. So the start time for the Rider game has been moved from 5 down to 2. Eats up the afternoon a little bit, but then we'll get to watch the Cup Finals game on Saturday night. What are your, I guess, thoughts, predictions, feelings? What's the vibe of this team heading into week 1 of the season?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me who was going to win the Stanley Cup.
Sure. I'll give you Oilers Panthers pick.
I'm not putting my neck out on that one. I asked a few players about it. I asked Brett Lother and Jaden Dahlke. They're all cheering for the Oilers, even though they messed up their schedule a little bit. They said, "Hey, we'll play football anytime, and we can watch hockey afterwards." So they're looking forward to that. What do I think is going to happen? Well, we've noticed quite a bit the change in attitude around here a little bit, right? That there's that sense of confidence that comes from new coach Corey Mace. And they've made strong decisions. I think the decisions they made, I think, specifically about the quarterbacks, Taylor, are going to help this team moving forward because they made good, bold strokes. They did it with Lennius as well, the ones that we're talking about, right? That if you're going to make those moves, go ahead and make them, and the players will see that they're for the betterment of the team. That when the players have confidence in the coaches, they'll have confidence in themselves going forward too. I think this is a pretty solid competitive team. It once again always depends on quarterback Trevor Harris. Is he healthy for the entire season? But I can see them conceivably walking out of they play in Edmonton, then they got back-to-back against Hamilton. I could conceivably see them, because I don't think Hamilton's got much of a football team. They could come out of that 3-0. And I know those are high hopes, and you think, oh, that's unrealistic, but it's certainly a possibility. And if they come out 2-1, well, that's not bad as a kickstart to this season. I think they're better than both those teams. I think they're better than the Calgary Stampeders. So I think they have a very good chance, obviously, of making the playoffs and being competitive, good enough. Teams have won Grey Cup, including the Saskatchewan Roughriders, by being in third place in the West. So that, I guess, that makes them a contender. When I look at numbers, 11-7, 10-8, yeah, they're a better than average football team, and I think that they're certainly a playoff contender.
Yeah, I don't know if they're quite at BC and Winnipeg's caliber quite yet. They don't. The Riders, I don't feel like they have many holes in the roster aside from maybe the defensive backfield where there's a bit of unknown, but if they put together a strong start to the season, and then they finally meet BC and meet Winnipeg midway through the year, we might be talking about them being not necessarily a contender for first. I don't think they're there quite yet. I think BC is going to take a step forward this year, and Winnipeg, I don't see them taking a step back. I feel like they're the same, but Saskatchewan's kind of trying to knock at the door to be like, hey, we're here too. So I think we're going to kind of find out maybe midway through the year after that start against Edmonton, Hamilton, to see who this Rider team really is. I feel like they're close, but they're not quite there. They kind of need a seat at the big table, I guess. They need to prove themselves first before they're into that home playoff conversation.
Yeah, and if they come out of this below 500 these first three games, it's a litmus test against teams that shouldn't be top of the line either, right? So if they're struggling against those teams, then it could be a long season for the Roughriders. You make a good point. They're a little uncertain. They've moved some players around who we've watched in the secondary, and I think that that might still be the spot that they're a little bit vulnerable. We'll see if Roland Milligan's healthy and some of these guys are okay. That's where they're probably the least experienced. So we're going to find out if teams can exploit them. But you know what makes a really good defensive backfield, right? A very strong pass rush. And I think this team has got a very strong pass rush. So that's going to help that defensive backfield quite a bit.
Yeah, that might be one of their strengths this year. They have so many returning guys, plus the addition of Malik Carney, and I guess Corey Mace might do it differently, but I feel like this team has rotated and kept guys fresh a lot. So, they have probably 6 guys who can trot out there at any given time and keep the guys fresh versus, having the same 4 guys just continue to rush and rush and rush. So, Brian Cox, I think, is going to take a big step this year. Lanier and Johnson in the middle. Lanier was hurt last year, played a bit on the outside last year, didn't really have the season many expected of him. So I assume he's going to be healthy to start week 1. I think he's been limited the past few days at camp and at practice. So, I assume he's going to be ready to go. Micah Johnson, obviously, we know what he can do. And then Malik Carney on the other side. It could be a breakout player. I think he could be the breakout player. He's already there in terms of, he's shown what he can do, but I think he's going to be a guy who's going to take a big step forward in his first year.
They do have a good looking front 4. And when you talk about the rotation, Lanier and Johnson are veterans. They've been around a little bit, and I know they don't like taking a break, but you can watch them as the season goes along and even as games progress. By taking them out a little bit and giving them some fresh legs, they're coming in against a tired offensive line late in the game, and they're very effective. So depending on how Corey Mace, a former defensive lineman himself, how he handles that rotation and how they play it, they could be very strong. That's a few years ago. That's when teams started rotating those defensive linemen. It's funny to me that they never rotate the offensive linemen, right? You want a good cohesive unit, but when you've got 4 defensive guys, they come from all over the place, and you just need fresh legs. So I think that's a real strength of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. You're right. I'm expecting Henry and Cox to have really good seasons. We're going to say, wow, these guys can play. And if they do, then the Saskatchewan Roughriders are a pretty solid unit.
And on the offensive side of the ball, we should talk about AJ Ouellette, because he might be the biggest X factor for this team this year. We know what Trevor Harris, how accurate he can be, and how good his arm is. I think he's going to be just fine if he gets protected and he has a bunch of weapons to throw to. But having that secondary option of the power running game, which this team hasn't had in a long time, I feel like is going to be a turning point in how their offense is going to produce this year.
That's true. Trevor Harris won't be running the football much, right? So they brought in a guy who's going in AJ Ouellette, who's a real workhorse, and as you say, pounds the football and wears down the other team. That's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how they rotate that in, how they spread that around. I talked to offensive coordinator Mark Mueller today at practice, and he says every play we've got an option to go short, medium, or long. He said, and I think the short game is probably going to be a lot of the running game because AJ Ouellette can really be a strong, wear him down weapon, even without the hammer in his hand.
Yeah, the only thing that if they fall into this trap of running on first down every single time and they only get 3-4 yards and they set up the second and long, it just screams to me like they're going to eventually abandon the run and it's going to be this boring football that we've seen over the years. This team just not able to put together. So as long as they mix it up and they have some better looks on first down and not just handoff up the middle to start, even though they have this running back they paid a lot of money, I feel like they need to switch it up and maybe swing him out and get him out catching some balls in the flats. There's always opportunity for that. So as long as we don't get this boring, predictable handoff, run to set up the punt type of football, I think this offense will be better than it was last year.
Yeah, we've seen it for the past few years. But don't forget, Taylor, it's a brand new team this year, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, it is. But I still feel like it carries something. I don't know. Maybe it's just us seeing the same team trot out there, regardless of who's out there.
Well,
it's just gonna be
the way we started. They made changes at quarterback. I think they've made changes throughout their philosophy too. So I think it's a fresh new start for this football team, and I think we're going to see some different things rather than the same old tired stuff.
Yeah. You never know. Do you have a player to watch this year, or a guy you think is going to be maybe the breakout year? I think there was talk last year heading into camp, during camp, that Sean Bain Jr. was going to have a big year, and he certainly proved that. Put up 1,000 yards. I think he's probably due for an encore performance, being the number one guy again this year. Or I assume, I don't necessarily think he's the number one guy, but I feel like they have 2 or 3 kind of 1A, 1B, 1C type of players, Schaefer, Baker, MLS. I feel like they have a lot of guys, and I think any one of those 3 could be the number one guy on any given night. But maybe who would be your breakup player or guy to watch this year?
Well, I think CJ Rivas showed us a little bit last year what a good player he is. He took over for Derek Moncrief on that wide side linebacker spot, basically a dime backer. And I think when he's in, I think he can be a real weapon. Moncrief had been such a great player for so long, and you could see him wearing out last year, and they had a guy ready to step in. Rivas has got half a year of good, solid experience under his belt, and I think he could be a real impact player, especially with that strong pass rush in front of him. I think that will allow him to blitz, to cover. He can do all that stuff, and he likes to hit. So that if you're looking for a player for me to say, that's the guy I want to see full time and see how he reacts.
And I think for me, Jareth Stearns, talking about the receivers, there's just something about his hands and in his movements. He's obviously a really good college receiver, and he had flashes last year, so I'm excited to see what he brings in a full season, although I don't know if he's going to get that many targets because of the receivers that I just mentioned before. So I feel like he has the potential for a breakout year, but it also is going to depend on volume and how many targets he gets, because you're not going to go away from MLS and KSB and Bain, and you got to run the ball as well. So Jareth Stearns is kind of maybe a potential breakout later in the year as they deal with some injuries and whatnot. There's always injuries, so you never know at what position they're going to be hurt at. So I would keep an eye on Jareth Stearns this year. Can I put you on the spot for win totals? I think last year you said they were going to hit 10, and I think they were on pace for 10 prior to.
Yeah, but yeah. I can always hinge it a little bit. As long as Trevor Harris is healthy, I say that they're going to get to 11-7 this year.
And that would be third place or second place, do you think?
Battling for second, but probably in third. I think that they got a chance. I agree with you that I think BC is the best team in the West. I think they got a chance to challenge the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and might even bump by them into second place.
well, we saw BC and Winnipeg basically run away. Well, they were kind of neck and neck with 1 and 2 last year, and then it was just a team of like a 6th-place team or a 6-win team got into the 3rd-place spot last year. I don't think that's going to happen this year, although I don't think Calgary and Edmonton are that much better than they were last year. I think Saskatchewan is largely improved from last year. So, yeah, I think Calgary and Edmonton will round out the bottom. Do I think there's a crossover with one of those teams? Probably not. But you never know really what Toronto is going to do in the East.
What's your number? What's your number?
Well, I was going to say I think they're going to be 9-9 in 3rd place, and then they're going to be heading to Winnipeg to the semifinal. So I got a 500 team, which is an improvement from last year. I just think they still need to prove themselves. They have a rookie head coach, a rookie offensive coordinator. I think they are improved, but I don't think the 2 teams above them have gotten worse, and so that's where it's tough for me to say that they're going to crack into a home playoff spot, because I don't see Winnipeg and BC being worse than they were last year.
All good. We'll see how it starts Saturday.
Yeah, looking forward to it. All right. Well, for episode 135, I think we did okay. I don't know if it was quite Rob and Murray esque what they did. They're great co-hosts over the years. So, Darrell, thanks for joining me, and we'll be back next week for episode 136 to discuss the Riders Elks game ahead of week 2.
See you soon.
Thanks.